Blessings. Welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. I got to admit, before I get started, I've had to do a couple of takes because um, I'm going way over time because there's so many good law enforcement takeaways. So I'm going to try and narrow this down. So I've got to hit it quick, and I'm trying to get quicker as I go along. Today's read is Psalm 22, Psalm 2, 22, and 27. In Psalm 2, real quick, it says in chapter 2, verse 10, God talks about the kings of the earth needing discernment and the judges of the earth needing to take heed or take warning. And the reason for this, and the reason I think this is such a good law enforcement takeaway, is judges of the earth in David's time and in the writers of the Old Testament. Um, if you think back on some stories you've heard or just things of the past, doctors made home visits. They didn't sit in an office and wait for people to come to them with their illnesses. Doctors would go to homes where people were sick and they would treat them at home. And in David's time, they didn't have the criminal justice system we had where David could say, you peace officers, while you're out in the field, while you're uh, protecting the oppressed and the afflicted. So he didn't have this concept of the modern day law enforcement officer. So when you read where it says judges, we are the people who show up on scene and we make decisions and judgments. We'll take people who are fighting, we'll take both sides of the story and we'll try and find the truth, and we'll come to a judgment right there. Somebody may go to jail, both may go to jail, nobody may go to jail, but we make that judgment. So when he talks about you judges take warning, we need to insert ourselves in this verse and say we need to take warning. Now, what is David saying take warning against? He says choose to worship God. Um, we have to acknowledge God, give God credit. We have to be followers of God. He is the author of true justice. And if we're going to carry out justice, we don't want to carry out the wrong justice. We want to carry out God's true justice. So we have to choose to worship Him, to know Him, to read His Word, and to get revelation from Him on what true justice is. So this verse is a huge law enforcement takeaway verse. Again, chapter 2, verse 10. Um, I am not going to go into chapter 22, but I really hope you'll read that. That is a prophetic word of David talking about Jesus on the cross. Matter of fact, every time I get a new Bible, I title it the Gospel of David. So read that. It will remind you of things. You'll see things that you're like, oh, that happened to Jesus when he's on the cross. But you've got to remember that this was written hundreds of years before Jesus came to the earth. So it's a prophecy from David. Chapter 27 was a great law enforcement verse, and I'm going to try and get through some of the takeaways. It starts out, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Um, as law enforcement officers who carry out God's true justice, we have to live under His umbrella of light and truth. We have to know what He expects of us. And I think this verse speaks directly to us as law enforcement. And if we do follow God's rule, what are we worried about what man's going to do to us? We have God as our king, as our leader, as our chief. Jumping down, um, we have, as law enforcement officers, we know we're the thin blue line that separate good society from wickedness and chaos and evil. And the people on this side of the thin blue line are defined in verses 2 and 3. So it lines right up with our job and our task. Verse 13 is so important for me personally. I think you'll get something out of it. It's not specifically related to law enforcement. Anybody can get something from this, but the verse says, I would have despaired unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. David didn't take his eyes off of God and look at the circumstances around him and let that dictate his faith and just get in despair and go into this defensive mode and try and fight back. He remembered to keep his eyes on God. I would have despaired unless it had been for God and His goodness. The last verse, I love this. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. We all need to be courageous. That's what cops are. We're courageous men and women, but we're courageous for the right reasons. But as 27 goes, I want to read the first verse to you and the last verse to you. Think of this in your law enforcement career. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the defense of my life. Whom shall I dread? Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your hearts take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. What a great way to end today's daily devotional. Tomorrow, read up on 45, Psalm 45, Psalm 47, 48, 87, and 110, and be safe out there. Look for God at work, and I'll see you tomorrow.